In Mumbai, a grandmother built a secret empire, one fueled by cash and a whole lot of secrets. But here's the thing. One of those secrets, a rumor she started herself, didn't just end her life. It ended the lives of her two young grandchildren, too. This is the story of how a dangerous test of loyalty turned into an absolute death sentence.
So, our story begins with a call to the police from Mumbai's Mira Road area. Inside a small home, a place that should have been safe, they found an absolutely unthinkable scene. A grandmother and her two little grandchildren, all brutally murdered. Right away, investigators noticed something that just didn't add up. The door wasn't forced open, there was no sign of a break-in at all. And that pointed to the most chilling clue of all. The victims knew their killers. They had actually opened the door and let them right in. So let's dive into the first part of this story, the horrific crime itself. You see, the investigation started with a puzzle. At this brutal crime scene, the most important clue wasn't what the police found, but what was missing. Okay, so the victims were identified as 45-year-old Babita and her two grandkids, Shama and Arman. Now, about 7 years before this, Babita's daughter Afsana had passed away, and Babita stepped up to become their only guardian. And from what everyone said, she absolutely doted on them. Now, that complete lack of forced entry, that told police this wasn't just some random robbery gone wrong. No way. The killer, or maybe killers, were people Babita trusted enough to let them inside her home late at night. And that one simple fact, it narrowed the search from, millions of strangers down to a much smaller circle of people she knew. As the detectives started digging into Babita's life, they realized pretty quickly that she was not just a simple grandmother. Nope. She was a woman of deep, deep contradictions. She lived multiple lives, all at the same time. And well, each of those lives came with its own list of potential enemies. Babita's life was just a fascinating mix of opposites. To some people, she was just this loving grandmother, but to others, she was a ruthless moneylender. She even sold illegal liquor right out of her home and had a past as a bar dancer just to make ends meet. Every single one of these identities created a whole new list of potential suspects for the investigators to look into. So this really complicated life, it gave the police a whole roster of people to look at right from the start. First, you had her own sister and nephew, Mamata and Sanjay. Maybe they were motivated by greed. Then there was Avak, her son-in-law, the kid's father. He had this long-standing grudge with Babita over money and who should have custody of the children. And then there was Bismal. He was Babita's own enforcer, the guy who collected her debts and knew the ins and outs of her entire cash business. But here's where it gets interesting. As the police were questioning all these people, they all kept mentioning this same thing, one single piece of information that had been making the rounds in the community. A rumor that turned out to be the real reason for this whole tragedy. 1.5 crore rupees. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's about 15 million rupees, or around 180,000 US dollars. The word on the street was that Babita had just bought a brand new, super heavy-duty safe to store this huge pile of cash, right there, in her house. That's the kind of money that could make anyone pretty desperate. And now for the most shocking twist of all. Where did this crazy rumor come from? From Babita herself. Seriously? When people warned her it was dangerous, she just replied, "If this doesn't leak, how will I know who is jealous of me?" She was testing the loyalty of everyone around her. And man, what a fatal miscalculation that turned out to be.
So the rumor explained the motive, but the evidence, it just wasn't matching up with the suspects. Forensics found a fourth blood sample at the scene, an unidentified one, that didn't belong to any of the victims or the people they were looking at. The police suddenly realized they were looking for someone else entirely, a threat that had been hiding right there in plain sight.
The investigation completely pivoted. By tracing Babita's very last phone call, they found a woman named Shabnam Khan. Now, Shabnam was one of Babita's clients, and through her, they identified her husband, Akbar, and an auto rickshaw driver he had recruited, a guy named Feroz. This trio, they were never even on the police's radar, because their connection to Babita was, well, purely business. The plot itself was brutally simple. Shabnam was at Babita's house one day and overheard her talking about the 1.5 crore rupees. And just like that, her greed caught fire. She ran and told her husband, Akbar, who then went and recruited Feroz to help them out. So on the night of the murder, Babita sees a familiar face, Shabnam, at her door, and she let them all inside.
All right, so now that the real suspects were identified, this case turned into a manhunt. The police had the who, the what, and the why. Now they just needed to connect those last few pieces of evidence to catch them before they could just vanish.
Okay, so here's how it all came together. That fourth blood sample, it confirmed an unknown attacker who was probably hurt in the struggle. That final phone call, it gave them Shabnam's name. Then, a witness at a local auto stand reported seeing the trio, and get this, confirmed one of the men was injured. This led to a super dramatic chase, with police tracking them on a train heading out of the state. They finally caught them when they got off to take their injured accomplice to a hospital.
Once they were caught, the whole story came pouring out. Their motive was one thing and one thing only: that rumored 1.5 crore rupees. This wasn't about revenge or some old grudge. It was pure 100% premeditated greed, sparked by a lie that they just desperately wanted to believe was true.
And here it is, the final, devastating gut punch of this whole story. When the police finally opened that safe, they didn't find 1.5 crore rupees. They found only 15 lakhs, just a tenth of the amount from the rumor. The trio had murdered 3 people for a treasure that never even existed.
You know, this entire tragedy really is a powerful reflection on things. I mean, yeah, money is a necessity. We all need it. But that desire for more than you need, that can push people to do the absolute unthinkable. Babita's pride let her start a rumor, and the killer's greed led them to commit murder. In the end, they were all destroyed by their own desires. This is one of those stories that just forces you to look at your own life, you know? Babita fell victim to her own test, and her killers basically became slaves to a fantasy. It leaves all of us with a really haunting question. Are our desires under control, or are they the ones controlling us?